Imagine for a second that everything you thought you knew about certain religious words was, well, let's just call it a surface level understanding.
Right.
You've been looking at the cover of a book and just assuming you've read the whole novel.
That's a very polite, diplomatic way of putting it, I think. I might be a bit more blunt. Imagine if you were reading the raw code for a website, but you actually thought you were reading a poetry collection.
Oh, wow.
You would just miss the functionality entirely.
Exactly. And I'm trying to be diplomatic here. But seriously, imagine if words like intoxication or gambling weren't just about a bottle of wine or a roulette wheel in a casino. Imagine if they were actually ancient sociological codes.
Right.
Codes for things like blind ritualism and economic exploitation.
It really sounds like the plot of a conspiracy thriller, doesn't it? The Da Vinci Code meets the wealth of nations.
Yeah.
But what we are looking at today in this deep dive is a radical and a truly radical reinterpretation of Quranic verses. Specifically, we are zooming in on Surah Al-Baqarah verses 219 through 221.
And just to set the scene for you listening right now, this isn't your standard Sunday school or I guess Friday sermon lesson. We aren't talking about don't drink and don't bet.
No, not at all.
We are diving into a stack of sources that includes incredibly detailed exegetical notes, lectures on the architecture of a rational social order, and some really heady linguistic analysis.
Very heavy, especially defining the difference between deen, which the text defines as a system of life, and mazhab, which is ritualistic religion.
Right.
And that distinction is really the pivot point for everything we're going to discuss today. The material we have argues that these verses aren't just some checklist of do's and don'ts for personal piety.
Right. It's not just about getting into heaven.
Exactly. They are actually a sociological blueprint, a layout for society built entirely on what the text calls intellectual awakening.
So the mission for this deep dive is to uncover exactly how these texts propose a world that completely rejects anything that numbs the mind and rejects any wealth that is unearned. And honestly, some of this stuff is going to challenge a lot of conventional thinking. It definitely challenged mine just reading the prep notes.
It certainly will. And I think that brings us to the so what factor. Why does this matter to you, the listener, right now?
Yeah. Why should they care?
Because maybe you aren't religious. Or maybe you are. Why should you care about ancient linguistics? Because, according to these sources, societal collapse, the breakdown of our cities, our economies, our mental health, it doesn't happen because people are sinful in the traditional sense.
Right.
It happens when reason is suppressed and when wealth becomes totally disconnected from labor.
It's not a theological debate about angels and demons. It's a structural debate about why societies fail.
Precisely.
Now, before we really jump in, we do need to drop our standard disclaimer. We are analyzing a specific set of interpretive texts. We are impartially reporting on the arguments presented in these sources. We aren't telling you what to believe, we aren't preaching, and we certainly aren't endorsing a specific religious viewpoint.
We are just unpacking the internal logic of these fascinating documents.
Exactly. We're acting as archaeologists of ideas today. And the argument begins with a battle. Not a physical one with swords or drones, but a battle for the human mind.
So let's unpack this. The first concept the sources tackle is khamr. Now, if I ask anyone on the street or even a scholar what khamr means in an Islamic context, they're going to say alcohol.
Wine, whiskey, beer.
And linguistically, if you open a modern dictionary, they aren't wrong. But our sources argue they aren't entirely right either.
Right, because it's
Much broader. They argue that alcohol is just one subspecies of a much larger genus. They argue that khamr is a massive category. To understand why, we have to go back to the root. The root letters are KHMR.
KHMR, and what is that code for?
In the ancient Arabic lexicon, before it became this purely legalistic term, it conveyed the action of covering, veiling, or concealing. Think about fermentation. When you ferment grapes to make wine, what actually happens?
It bubbles up. You get that thick foam on top.
Exactly. The foam rises and covers the clear juice underneath. That bubbling layer that hides the essence, that is the linguistic DNA of khamr. It's something that rises up and obscures reality.
You can see the metaphor for wine clearly there. You drink it, the foam hits your brain, your senses get dull, and your clarity is veiled. You just don't see reality anymore. You see a distorted version of it.
Precisely. But here is where the sources drop the hammer. They argue that absolutely anything, whether it's a substance, an ideology, a ritual, or an emotion that generates that foam and veils your critical thinking faculty, is technically and legally khamr.
That is a massive expansion of the law. You're saying this isn't just about passing a breathalyzer test. You're saying I could be stone cold sober, blowing a 0.0, and still be under the influence of khamr.
According to this interpretation, yes. If your intellect is covered, you are intoxicated. And the sources explicitly categorize man-made religion, specifically the ritualistic, non-rational performance of religion, as a form of comfort.
Hold on. Religion is the intoxicant. These are religious texts we're analyzing. Isn't that a massive contradiction?
It feels like one, doesn't it?
Right.
But it's the central tension of the entire deep dive. The text distinguishes between deen, which they define as a rational, law-based system of life, and mazhab, which is ritualistic religion. They argue that mazhab operates on the brain exactly like alcohol. Think about it. What happens when someone is drunk?
Slurred speech, loss of inhibition. They might get super emotional, angry, or overly affectionate. They just do things they wouldn't normally do.
And importantly, they are highly suggestible. Their logic center, the prefrontal cortex, is basically dampened. The sources argue that when you enter a high-intensity religious gathering, specifically one designed to bypass reason, the exact same thing happens.
Like the rhythmic
Chanting, the incense, the rising volume of the speaker, the collective swaying of the crowd.
It's the hype. I've been to concerts that feel exactly like that. You get lost in the crowd. You feel this wave of energy.
You get veiled in the crowd. The text calls this emotional intoxication. There is a really fascinating breakdown in the notes about the psychology of the sermon.
I read that part.
It argues that many religious orators, and frankly political demagogues too, use specific cadences and pitches to induce a trance state. They aren't trying to engage your intellect at all. They're actively trying to bypass it, to trigger the dopamine, and very often to trigger the checkbook. But yes, chemically the result is a suspended intellect. The source says if you make a decision based on that emotional high, whether it's voting for a candidate because he made you feel angry, or donating to a cause because the music made you cry, you are acting under the influence. You are intoxicated.
So if I'm understanding this rational order correctly, a person who never touches a single drop of whiskey, but makes life decisions based on a superstitious fear or an emotional sermon.
It's a drunkard. In the eyes of this interpretation, they are a drunkard. And actually, the text suggests they are much worse than a drunkard.
How so? I mean, a hangover eventually wears off. It hurts, but it goes away.
That's the exact point. The text makes this really biting comparison. A man drinks a bottle of wine. 8 hours later, his liver processes it. The veil lifts. He wakes up and realizes, oh man, I was an idiot last night. I shouldn't have said that.
Right, he sobers up.
But the person intoxicated by dogma, the person drunk on the idea that I am the chosen one or this specific ritual will magically fix my life.
And they never sober up.
You might live 70 years in a permanent blackout. The veil never lifts because they believe the veil is holy. They think the intoxication is actually piety.
That is actually terrifying. It totally reframes the whole concept of a war on drugs. It suggests the most dangerous drug in the world is uncritical thinking.
And that leads us directly to the physiology. The sources don't just use metaphors here. They actually dive into biology to explain what a numbed mind looks like in practice. Did you read the section on the reflex action?
I did, but I really want you to break it down for everyone. It talked about a sleeping person and a pin.
Right. This is basic biology, but the application is profound. If you take a sleeping person in deep REM sleep and you prick their foot with a pin, what happens? The leg jerks back.
The literal knee-jerk reaction.
Literally. Now let's look at the wiring of that exact moment. What happened? The sensory nerve detected pain.
Okay.
It sent a signal to the spinal cord. Exactly, not the brain. The spinal cord sent a signal back to the motor neurons saying, contract, there's danger. And the leg moved.
And the brain just slept through the whole thing. The CEO of the body was out to lunch.
The self was absent. The brain, the seat of consciousness, the I was never consulted. It was a pure mechanical loop. Stimulus response, input, output.
So that's a reflex. We need that right. If I take a hot stove, I want my spinal cord to handle it before my brain has to write an essay about it. But what does that have to do with the rational social order?
Well, the sources argue that 90% of what we call worship today is a spinal reflex.
That is a harsh critique.
It's brutal. The text describes a person standing in prayer, reciting words they don't understand in a language they don't speak, bowing at the precise moment they are trained to bow.
Stimulus imam says, Allahu Akbar. Response body bows.
The spinal cord is working perfectly. The motor neurons are firing on all cylinders. But the mind, the intellect, it's completely asleep. It's thinking about dinner or business or nothing at all. The source argues that this isn't worship. It's a biological mechanism. It's the reflex action of the pious.
So you're basically a robot in that moment.
You are a biological automaton. And this brings a radical new meaning to verse 4.43 of the text.
That's the verse usually translated as do not approach prayer when you are drunk.
Right. The standard interpretation is put the wine bottle down before you enter the mosque. Simple, sensible. But look at it through this rational order lens. The verse says, do not approach prayer. And
Until you know what you were saying.
the condition for the prayer isn't just sobriety in terms of blood alcohol content. It is cognitive presence. The source argues if you are reciting a chapter of the scripture and you do not understand the sociological, economic, and moral implications of those words, you are intoxicated. You are performing a reflex action. You are forbidden from the practice until you wake up.
It's almost a catch-22 for a lot of people. It's saying, don't pray unless you are ready to think. That's a really high bar.
It's a gatekeeper. It's saying that mindless repetition isn't just neutral, it's deeply negative. It reinforces the habit of sleeping while awake. It trains you to disconnect your actions from your thoughts. And if you do that in the mosque, you'll do it in the voting booth, and you'll do it in the boardroom.
This reminds me of the section on istikhara. I grew up hearing about istikhara. It's usually presented as this beautiful thing where you ask God for guidance when you're confused. But the source material seems to, well, hate the modern version of it.
Hate might be too soft a word. It treats the modern practice of istikhara with absolute, utter disdain.
Because it's become a magic 8-ball.
Essentially, yes. The text describes how people use it today. You have a choice. Should I take this job? Should I marry this person? A rational human being weighs the pros and cons. They look at the salary, the commute, the compatibility, the values. They use the brain God gave them. They consult experts.
That's tafakkur, right? Deep reflection.
That's tafakkur. But the intoxicated mind, it wants a shortcut. It wants to bypass the hard work of thinking. So they pray 2 cycles, sleep on it, and hope for a dream. Or, as the source mentions, they open the book to a random page, read the first line, and let that decide their fate. The holy gamble. The source argues this is a direct insult to the creator. You were given a supercomputer in the human brain, and you are intentionally shutting it off to flip a coin. The text categorizes this dependency on omens and feelings as a form of self-inflicted blindness. It's a voluntary surrender of your agency.
It's so interesting because usually the person who does that, the person who leaves it all to God in that passive way, is seen as the most spiritual person in the room.
And this deep dive flips that table over entirely. It argues that the person who uses their reason, who struggles with the data, who makes a calculated decision based on justice and facts, that is the spiritual act. The passive person is just a sleeping body jerking its foot away from reality.
So we have the diagnosis for the mind. The first pillar of this rational society is soberness. Not just putting down the drink, but waking up the intellect, stopping the reflexes. But here's the problem. Let's say you wake up. You stop the rituals. You start thinking. You look around at your society with clear eyes for the first time. What do you see?
You see the inequality. You see the raw structure of power.
And that brings us to the second battle. The battle wasn't just for your mind. It was for your wallet. Because once you sober up, you realize the economy is completely rigged. This brings us to the second code word.
Maysir, this is section 2, the economic blockade.
Now again, if you ask the average person, Maysir means gambling. Poker slot machines, getting on horses.
And again, the sources say yes, but that is just the surface. We need to look at the linguistic roots. Maysir comes from a root meaning ease or relating to the left hand.
Why the left hand? Is this some sort of anti-left-handed bias?
No, nothing like that. In ancient usage, it implied doing something easily, casually. If you say, I did it with my left hand, it implies it took absolutely no effort. The source defines Maysir broadly as any wealth acquired with extreme ease, specifically without personal labor.
Wealth without work. That is a massive category. That covers way more than a blackjack table.
It shifts the definition from games of chance to economic exploitation. The core argument in the text is this. The breakdown of a just society happens when one person works and another person sweeps away the profit. That gap where effort is divorced from reward is Maysir.
The sources give some really specific and frankly quite modern examples of this. One that stood out to me was the critique of landlordism.
This is where the text gets truly revolutionary. It describes a landowner who simply draws a line on the ground, claims it as his, and then takes half the harvest while the farmer sweats in the field all year.
And the source explicitly categorizes that as Maysir.
Yes. Think about the mechanics of it. What did the landlord do? He owned a piece of paper. What did the farmer do? He tilled, he watered, he harvested. But the wealth is split. The landlord's share is unearned wealth. He didn't labor for the crop. His ownership claim is treated in this text as a form of gambling with the farmer's life.
It's fascinating because in modern economics, we call that passive income. And passive income is the dream. Everyone wants to make money while they sleep.
And The rational social order argues that a society obsessed with making money while you sleep is a society in steep decline. Because if you are making money while you sleep, someone else is working while they are awake to pay you.
It creates a completely parasitic relationship.
Exactly. And it didn't stop at agriculture. It went after business, too. There was a mention of the sleeping partner.
Right, the investor who provides capital but does no work yet takes a huge share of the profit.
The source argues this breaks the fundamental link between effort and reward. If money breeds more money without human exertion that is viewed in this framework as Maysir, it's treating the economy like a casino where the rich just inherently have the house advantage.
It even touched on corruption. There was this anecdote of the club game which felt straight out of a mob movie.
That was a very clever observation on how Maysir hides in plain sight. The text describes a scenario where someone wants a permit or a lucrative contract from a government official. They can't just hand over a bag of cash.
Because that's a crime. It's blatant bribery.
Exactly, it's illegal. So they meet at
A gentleman's club.
Right, they sit down at a card table. The petitioner plays against the official. And the petitioner intentionally loses. He throws the game. He loses a massive sum to the official.
Oh, no bad luck for me. Here's your winnings, Mr. Official.
It's a polite bribe, disguised bribery. But because it happened at a card table or under the guise of winnings, society might just wink at it. The source says this is Maysir in its purest form. It is the transfer of wealth without legitimate exchange or labor. It's using the mechanics of a game to mask the reality of theft.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The text talks about the consequence of this. Not just that it's unfair or mean, but that it physically damages the person receiving the free money. It uses the word ivim.
This is a radical redefinition. Usually, ivdom is translated as sin. Simple as that. Don't do it. It's a sin. But the expert analysis here goes back to the root again. Ivdom relates to a loss of energy, a loss of stamina, or
Atrophy, like a muscle you just don't use.
Exactly, the stagnation theory. The argument is that relying on unearned wealth actively destroys a human being's capacity to work. Think about it biologically. If you stop walking, your leg muscles atrophy. You eventually can't walk at all.
So if you stop earning through labor,
Your working muscles, your resilience, your innovation, your grit, your ability to solve complex problems, they atrophy. You become soft. You become completely dependent.
so Maysir isn't forbidden just because God said don't do it as a test of obedience. It's forbidden because it turns you into a helpless person.
That is the direct cause and effect logic the source presents. It says if the easy money stops, the person accustomed to Maysir is totally helpless. They've forgotten how to survive. The text describes Maysir as a massive boulder blocking the path to a rational society because it creates a class of people who are essentially parasites. Weak, atrophied parasites who consume but cannot produce.
Really reminds me of the story the source shared, the anecdote of the drunkard and the elephant. It was funny, but it had a really sharp point about this illusion of power.
It's a classic parable. A drunkard is stumbling down the street and sees a grand procession. A mahout, an elephant keeper, is riding a magnificent elephant. The drunkard, filled with that false liquid courage that Khamr shouts out, "Hey, you there! Will you sell this broken buffalo?"
Calling a massive elephant a broken buffalo, that's the Khamr talking. His perception is totally shot.
Precisely. The mahout, knowing the man is drunk, just plays along. He doesn't argue. He nods. The drunkard asks the price. The mahout says 1,000,000 rupees, a total fortune. The drunkard slams his hand on a table and says, "Done. Come to my house tomorrow morning for payment."
And the drunkard feels like a king. He just bought an elephant.
He goes home, passes out, morning comes, the alcohol wears off, the veil lifts. He wakes up with a splitting headache, and then there's a knock at the door. The mahout arrives with the elephant. The massive beast is blocking the sun. The drunkard, now sober and trembling, asks, "Who are you? What is that monster?" The mahout says, "I'm the merchant. You bought this elephant last night for 1,000,000 rupees.
And the punchline?
The drunkard replies, "My friend, tell the merchant that the buyer has left."
The buyer has left. Meaning the version of me that thought he was a king is just gone.
It's a comic story, but the analysis is so deep. Khamr, which is intoxication, and Maysir, easy money, give you a false sense of power. I am a king, I am rich, I am lucky, but it's an illusion. When reality sets in, when the hangover hits or the market crashes, you are weaker than you were before. You don't have the 1,000,000 rupees, and because of ivdam, because of that atrophy, you don't have the strength to earn it either.
So we have a society that needs to wake up its mind from Khamr, get back to work away from Maysir. But let's say we actually do that. We work hard, we earn honestly, we reject the easy money, we end up with a pile of cash that we actually worked for. What do we do with it? This leads to section 3, the solution.
This is the pivot point. The text poses the question directly from the Quran, what should we spend? You've earned it, it's yours. How much do you give back?
And the answer is one single word, al-Afw.
Al-Afw, usually translated as forgiveness, which is beautiful, but in an economic context, the source defines it as the surplus, whatever is beyond your immediate need.
This is where you, the listener, might want to check your wallet. Because the source uses a metaphor that I absolutely loved, the ticket analogy. It completely reframes what money actually is.
It's a very functional way to look at currency. The source argues, what is money? It is a ticket. What is a ticket for?
To travel, right? To get from point A to point B.
Right. A ticket allows you to reach a destination. It allows you to meet a need. Food, shelter, education, medicine. These are destinations. But imagine you are at a train station. You have a ticket to get home. That's your need. But then you see a pile of tickets on the floor. You start grabbing them. You stuff your pockets. You fill your suitcase with tickets. You are running around the station gathering thousands of tickets.
But I'm not traveling anywhere else. I'm just standing there holding tickets.
And if you aren't traveling, those tickets are useless paper? The source argues that the capitalist system gives the ticket intrinsic value. It tricks us into thinking the ticket itself is the goal. So we hoard them. We accumulate tickets we will never use to travel.
Meanwhile, there are people in the station, thousands of them, who are stuck. They can't get home. They can't get to the hospital. Not because there aren't enough seats on the train, but because I'm hoarding all the tickets in my suitcase.
Exactly. The rational order proposed here treats money strictly as a means to meet needs. Once your needs are met, the ticket loses its utility for you. It must be passed to someone who needs to travel. That is al-Afw, returning the surplus to the circulation of society. It's not charity, it's keeping the system moving.
The source gets pretty harsh on us humans here. It compares us to animals, and not in a flattering way at all. Usually we think humans are superior because we plan for the future.
No, it flips the script on the noble human entirely. It says, look at a bull grazing in a field, or a bird. A bull eats until its stomach is full. Once it's full, it stops, it lies down. It doesn't stand over the rest of the grass and say, this is mine, you can't have it. It walks away.
It doesn't have a savings account for grass. It doesn't worry about the grass running out in 10 years.
It trusts nature. It trusts the system. But humans, we claim to be the noblest of creatures, yet we hoard surpluses while our neighbors starve. We operate on a scarcity mindset even when we have massive abundance. The text argues that in this specific regard, this fear of the future and greed for the surplus hoarding makes humans lower than animals.
Because an animal knows when enough is enough. We don't. We are biologically confused.
We have lost the rationality of need. We are intoxicated by the desire for want, and that intoxication, that Khamr of greed, blocks the flow of Afw.
So let's pause and look at the structure we've built so far. We fix the mind, no Khamr. We fix the economy, no Maysir. We distribute the surplus, al-Afw. But where does this rational society actually live? Where is the training ground? It's not the parliament. It's the home.
Section 4, the microsociety. This was for me one of the most compelling parts of the analysis because it gets deeply personal. The source argues that you cannot build a rational society if the basic unit, the family, is irrational or conflicted.
And it starts with how we choose a partner. The source goes after the marriage checklist with an absolute sledgehammer.
Checklist, we all know it.
Salary, car, house, family status, height, looks, the CV of marriage.
The source calls this the materialist trap, and it uses incredibly strong language. It describes marriages based primarily on wealth and status as a form of prostitution of the intellect.
Well, that is vivid, and probably offensive to a lot of people.
It's meant to be shocking. It implies that you are trading yourself, your mind, your values, your agency for material comfort. You are selling your life for a ticket you don't actually need. The text says this leads to a household hell, not in the afterlife, but right here. A living hell of incompatibility.
Because if you marry for the car, what happens when you realize you have absolutely nothing to talk about in the car?
Precisely. And this leads to the reinterpretation of another major term, the mushrik.
Usually translated as polytheist, someone who worships idols.
But the source strips away the religious label and looks at the mindset. It defines a mushrik in the context of marriage as someone with a clashed worldview, someone whose core values are fundamentally opposed to yours.
So it's not about whether they check the Muslim, Christian, or Jew box on a census form. It's about their operating system.
Ideally, yes. The prohibition is against introducing a fundamental contradiction into the home. Think about the rational order we just discussed. Imagine one partner believes in al-Afw, giving away the surplus living, simply valuing intellect over material goods.
And the other partner believes in hoarding tickets. They believe that success equals the size of the bank account.
That is a clash of visions. The source asks, how can you build a life when your foundations are pulling in opposite directions? The home becomes a battlefield. Every financial decision, every parenting decision becomes a literal war.
The text gives a specific comparison to drive this home. It compares a servant to a tycoon.
Yes. It quotes the verse that says, it is better to marry a believing servant or maid someone of low social status but high ideological alignment than to marry a wealthy, attractive polytheist or person of conflicting values.
That is a radical assertion. It's saying, marry the janitor who shares your vision of a just world, rather than the billionaire who thinks greed is good.
Because the janitor helps you build a paradise at home, a place of peace and oneness of thought, the billionaire brings the hell of conflict. The source is telling us that paradise isn't just a place you go when you die, it's a mental and social state you build within your own four walls. If the home is a conflict zone, the society will be a conflict zone.
So we have the mind, the economy, and the home. But there is one group left out, the people who don't have a home or who have fallen through the cracks, the people who don't have the family unit to protect them.
Section 5, the integration of the isolated. This brings us to the term yatim.
Usually translated as orphan right, a child with no parents.
But again, the linguistic deep dive expands this. The source points to the root, meaning a lonely tree standing apart from the forest, or a pearl found alone in its shell. A yatim is anyone who is left alone or isolated in society.
So it's not just a child. It could be a widow. It could be an elderly person whose kids never call. It could be a refugee who just arrived and knows
anyone who is disconnected from the social fabric. And the source argues that a rational social order has a mandate. Not just to give them charity, that's the old model, here's $5, go away. No, the mandate is to integrate them, to make them equine brothers and sisters.
The text had a touching story about this, the lost brother analogy.
It recounted a story from the partition era. Chaos migration families torn apart. Two brothers were separated in the chaos. Years passed. They lived separate lives, maybe even suffered terribly. Then years later, they found each other.
And suddenly the suffering of the lonely brother ended. Not because he got money, but because he got his connection back. He had a tribe again.
He wasn't alone against the world anymore. The source argues that in a blind or intoxicated society, we are all lost brothers. We pass each other on the street entirely disconnected. We live in apartments next to people we don't even know. The rational order reveals the relationship. It says, look, that isolated person, that is your brother who got lost in the chaos.
It's not about writing a check to an orphanage so you can feel good about yourself. It's about removing the unevenness in society that made them isolated in the first place.
Exactly. It's a systemic solution. If the economy is just no Maysir and the surplus is circulating al-Afw and the home is built on shared values, then the yatim is naturally absorbed back into the family of society. There are no lonely trees in a healthy forest.
It really is a complete ecosystem. You can't just pick one part. You can't have the just economy if everyone is intoxicated by greed. You can't have the happy home if you are marrying for unearned wealth.
It's a holistic blueprint, and that is what makes it so challenging. It requires a total sobering up. You have to fix the software, which is the mind, and the hardware, which is the economy, simultaneously.
So let's bring it all into a synthesis. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I feel like my brain has done a full workout.
If we connect the dots, we see three pillars supporting this structure. First, the intellect. It must be awake. We have to reject the Khamr of blind ritual superstition and emotional manipulation. We have to stop the reflex actions and start using the prefrontal cortex.
Second is the economy. It must be just. We have to reject Maysir, the unearned wealth, the exploitation of others' labor. We have to stop trying to win the club game and start earning. And we have to embrace al-Afw, giving the surplus back to the community to keep the tickets moving to people who actually need to travel.
And third is the society. It must be integrated. That starts with the home built on ideological unity rather than the materialist checklist. And it extends to the yatim, ensuring that no one is left standing alone like a solitary pearl.
It's a really powerful vision. And it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on.
It does. The source leaves us with this final challenge. If religion in the traditional ritualistic sense acts as an intoxicant that numbs us to inequality, and if true faith, as defined by these texts, is the awakening of reason to solve that inequality, then we have to ask a hard question.
Are our current religious and economic structures actually designed to keep us drunk?
Are we being kept in a state of reflex action so that we don't question where the surplus is going? Are the lights and the sounds and the hype just there to keep us from noticing that the landlord is taking half the harvest? It's a question that requires a very sober mind to answer.
Well, I think that's enough to make anyone's brain spin, but in a good Tafakkur kind of way. I'm going to go check my pockets for extra tickets right now and maybe apologize to my spinal cord for overworking it.
And I'm going to make sure I'm not just jerking my foot when I should be walking.
Ideally, we'll see you all in the next deep dive. Stay sober, friends.
Stay rational.